Glad to have you here. I'm with the amazing counselor Tawni Acosta. She is a transgender activist, counselor, and educated. We welcome you back to the channel. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Whimsy. It's good to be back, and thank you for having me on your channel.
Yeah. So, what did you do this summer? How was your summer while you were away?
My summer has
Yes.
been
How were you? I didn't see you all of August. How we? I was
yes,
hoping to meet you in LA when I was up working and down
that's
working
right.
but we missed each other. How was your summer?
The summer's been good. The summer in Phoenix, where I live, has been punishing, in a word. But in the meantime, I'm continuing with my own education as well. I'm taking a speakership training. And
Nice.
so when trying to meet in LA, that's when I was in part of the speakership training, which is how to own your own stage, which is pretty important.
That I can see you doing that quite easily. Uh,
Thank you.
Congratulations. So today I thought we would talk about a couple different conversations that have come up. It was a very sweet question. Somebody had said, just to answer, if Tawni could, through this process, talk about, it was such a sweet question, what does family mean to you, Tawni? And I loved that.
Mhm.
So um, I thought that was such a simple, sweet question. And then I sent you that question, and I wanted us to both think about it because we have many families. Can you talk about that's a very powerful and yet simple question. What does family mean to you, Tawni?
Okay. Well, to me, at this point in my life, I could talk as far as my trajectory goes, but I think at this point in my life, family to me are what I would call, the term used in community is your chosen family. In other words, as I transitioned, I had all these people come into my life, many people leave my life. Chosen family ends up being the people that you're just so close to, the people who have your backs, the people who look out for you, the people who you want to spend your time with. And in a form or fashion, they become your family. Um, because I did this later in life, a lot of my quote unquote biological family has passed away. I do have one older sister. We are still in touch. Our relationship has, crossed the bridge of my transition, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, I think it takes on, a broader interpretation because family becomes, yes, your chosen family, your chosen communities, but also where one's life evolves to. At present, I am single, but I do hope to have, a partner at some point in my life as well. To me, the family is all these things that just come into my life at present that are very important to me. That are, like I have a friend, one of my transgender friends, she's a huge activist. Her name's Jenny Gutierrez. I'm going to be picking her up at the airport. She is one of my truest, most important friends. Um, when you have friends that are that important and that close, that's what makes our lives rich. Now,
Mm-hmm.
is it a biological family in the traditional sense of the word? No, not really. But transitioning is such an enormous equation. Some, you know, that this is me and what it means to me. If I could speak more in general, if that's okay.
Yes, please.
Speaking more in general, as people go through a transitional process to their authentic self, that can redefine all of their relationships. Everything from family to friends to career, everything changes because, they kind of transition along with you.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have, in because I am definitely a baby boomer, just like many. And so I'm of that generation. So how that works for my generation is much different than your a Gen X or Gen Z or even younger, because the way that viewpoint is a lot more broader. And as well, their way that they may be accepting of gender identity or the way they may accept somebody being their authentic self is a little more open than it was for my generation. So I've been able to be privileged to witness to marriages that have, survived. Survived is not the correct word, but marriages that have continued
It's
through a
still marriage,
transition
honey.
process. I
Oh my God.
so to me, what amazes me about that, I know as a person who's transitioned, all those moving parts as I experience them, but for a spouse who has a partner who's transitioning and all the things that go with that, I think that spouse is really extraordinary if it is in their agreement that they end up staying together throughout the process. And I know a few of them. I
Yes.
know some who have, and to me, it's like I want to hug all those spouses who are in for the long haul.
Yes, it's beautiful. So when we think about family units, I'm sure there are many family units, but just to make things simple for the audience, we'll talk about 3 family units that somebody who is transgender may want to examine. The first is your family of origin that you're born into. You don't get to choose that family. It's just kind of your fate and what those dynamics are like. And then you may have a transitional family, which may be counselors, therapists, support groups, transitional housing, if your life is endangered, et cetera, et cetera. Those kinds of opportunities are there that's basically a transitional family, I think of, that's going to get you to safety and hopefully get you to a place where you can stand on your feet and get to eventually what is your real family, or or what you speak about, which is your tribe, the people that are going to be there long term and support you. Does that make sense to you, those 3
Yes.
boxes?
Yes, no, actually, that's a very good way to characterize it because it characterizes the process. And it's a process for sure. I like that, in the very beginnings, depending on how it goes for a person, yes, some form of therapeutic counsel, therapeutic support is, in my opinion, very, very necessary, but also it's hard. It may not, it costs a lot. It's hard to get access to if you don't have all those financial resources. But on the other hand, if it's available, it's highly recommended working with somebody very skilled in these matters and areas as well. For myself, a big thing was just what you mentioned, were support groups. And where, at the time I was in Los Angeles, and they have the LGBTQ plus center in Los Angeles. And just as a note, that whole satellite of centers by the LA Center, it is the largest in the world.
Oh, wow. That's incredible.
And yeah, and so it's an excellent model. But that said, when I was starting my process, the support groups that they had there were essential for me. And just to be able to go into a room of people, anywhere between 20 and 50, and see a whole group of people that are like yourself. And it's in a different context. It's, you could go to, gay clubs or things like that, LGBTQ plus clubs and stuff like that for fun. But this is where people got together and talked about the challenges of their journeys.
Right.
And to be in rooms that are like that are affirming, and then to realize I'm amongst a group of people where everybody else is dealing with the same challenges I am. And all of a sudden it takes a lot of isolation, and it gives somebody a bigger viewpoint that there's hey, there's a path forward, 100%. And the support groups were huge for me. And later I ended up facilitating those support groups at the center, which I absolutely love doing. I'm not doing that so much anymore because I live here in Phoenix.
Now,
am I answering
yes,
your
thank you very
question?
much. And we'll go more into making sure people have resources. your first family, the family we don't get to choose, the family of origin, can be a challenge for
Sure.
many people. Can you talk a little bit about your generation and maybe a little bit more? I've been noticing a lot of seniors are starting to come out transgender because maybe they were in hiding because they were born in the 1950s or whatever. Can you talk about your
Right.
family of origin and your story and tell us a little bit about your awakening and all of that and how
Okay,
you
sure.
reconciled with your family of origin?
Okay, so yeah, my father was a professor of mechanical engineering at Caltech. So, and then my mother, she had a master's in psychology, but then eventually changed over to a very male career. In the day, this will date, I was born in 1959, by the way, so that gives us a time point, a
Right.
reference. Um, my mother her career ended up being, and talk about obsolete career. She was a
Oh,
draftsman,
wow.
which was an all male field. So my parents, if I could characterize both my parents, obviously very high end academics, high end intellectuals. That's the house. So I could kind of say make a comparison. Growing up in my family was a little bit like, the 60s version of the Big Bang Theory.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense, actually. I can totally see that. Did your sister get some of those high IQ points?
My sister is talented. Her talents are in budget. She's an expert in government policy, in budgeting and
Oh,
finance.
wow.
Okay. And so that is her gift, not mine.
And you're all,
That
and
is not my
I
gift.
think you were all musicians. Is that, yeah, I remember you telling me.
That's correct.
Mhm.
I think in my family there's two big things: was science, obviously, and my dad's uncle was a professional violist,
Oh
so
my
music
God.
was very big in our family.
The viola is amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, uh, how did you handle, like, when did you first know that you identified as female? Like, when we think about your childhood, like, what I think of is it almost sounds like Ozzy and Harriet. They looked at you and said boy, and then perfect. We've got the boy and we've got the girl and we've got the happy home. And I take it you probably did you have a golden retriever? I mean, was it the whole?
No, I was highly allergic, so I couldn't have pets when I grew up.
Oh,
I mean, when I grew up, just a note, as a very young kid, I was very sickly. Thankfully, I have great health right now. But when I was a youth, all the way into junior high, kind of tailed off, I was very I struggled with health a lot. I was always getting sick, so I couldn't have pets. And because at the time when Los Angeles used to be what the smog in Los Angeles, even way back that day, used to be even worse than it
right.
is now, which is hard to believe. That said, it was so smoggy, and all of our family, except my father, was so sick that we moved from Altadena, where we lived, and we moved to a small beach town called Seal Beach. And that's really where I grew up. So, um, yes, I actually started talking and forgot your question. I
Oh, what was it like
apologize.
growing up as a transgender female in that kind of environment? What was the
Ooh,
psychological impact? Because when I think of a person's origins, is it going to be supportive, not supportive, the generation, the family of origin? I think it's going to make an impact on what my transition family is going to look like. Am I going to have,
sure.
if I've completely lost my family, because they, for whatever reason, can't accept me, and I am completely an orphan, which is devastating. It's one of the reasons why we see high suicide rates, is because people lose everything. It's horrific. Which is why I think these transitional families are so important. They're going to catch you in that process. And so I'm just
Yeah.
wondering what kind of psychological gymnastics a person has to do to survive in that kind of a rigid family structure.
Yes, that was hard. And we kind of mentioned this in other, but when I grew up, in some deep way, I knew I was different. And the subconscious mind is brilliant. I also knew it wasn't safe in my family to express. My father's family is of Spanish descent. My mother's family is very traditional Germanic Protestant or Swiss Germanic Protestant. Actually, my grandmother grew up with the Eisenhower family in Kansas, believe it or not. So, very traditional in those respects. I think that because I was born, male, that I was the only male in the family, so there's intense pressure for me to be that character type, which I wasn't. And the jokes were, and I don't know if I'm repeating myself, when I grew up, I heavily suppressed who I was as a necessity of survival.
Right.
Because I just knew I wouldn't get through it. I was, going back in a lot of therapy to really understand. I was pretty aware of this around 5 or 6, pretty clearly. And then when I got to junior high, it was even more clear. So psychologically, I tried to take this identity of Tawni, or my identity as transgender, and just squish that down into a tiny, tiny little peanut. And the rest of my life was like playing the role of being male. And pretty soon that's what I got used to. So, and there's a whole host of psychological maladies that come with that, that you could call codependency, looking for validation outside of yourself. And it leads to, like, yes, disassociation, all that unhealthy stuff definitely took place inside of me. And that is in our generation. And so I think that when I grew up, I had embedded in me a whole pattern of living, which was adjusting to be what I thought what society thought I should be, but who I wasn't. So it's kind of crazy if you really think about it.
And the purpose of the transitional family is going to be to help a person in that process and find themselves, because they've had to bury themselves for so much, I would think.
Yes. Yes.
I want to talk about your role, because in the process of transition, that of looking for that transitional family, they come to you for help. What does that look like? Like, what is that? What does that look like?
I think the biggest things that I help people who are in this circumstance is, it's the hard work, is encouraging people to come to terms with their identity. It's something that I can't do for the person, literally, but I am the catalyst to have that help happen. And in that process of their true identity, that's when as that strengthens, and that self-esteem and self-worth, and those start to find a home in the person, all the avenues to start walking forward in a transitional process, wherever it may go, start to make their appearance in their lives. But if that identity is just so crushed, I think in a way what I really help people with is, reinforcing that identity and letting it have its breathing space, letting it have its room, letting it just, it's kind of like, well, I have an obsession with wine. As you know,
Yeah.
it's like when you uncork a very good wine, it has to breathe.
I can't even spell it
Like a
without
good
getting a
red
headache,
wine.
but you go ahead.
Yes. So I feel, in a way, is their identity has been corked up all this time. And you have to be patient and kind and gentle and affirming. So I see my role, I will characterize it a little bit, is like being kind of that Sherpa that helps somebody. Hey, let's go up the mountain. Okay, you have a heavy bag. I'll carry it for you a little bit, but then I'm going to give it back to you. As you get just far up enough, you can take the atmosphere, whatever. So I kind of see transitioning and the help that I do offer to people, and not just transitioning in general, people in the LGBTQ community, and even more general issues of identity. Because when we live a life that's not ours, we get lost in that process.
Yes, I understand. One of the questions that's come up a lot politically is the fact that the LGBTQ community, the trans community, is being attacked a lot. Is it Matt Walsh? Is that his name? The man that's been harassed?
Yes, yes.
He's got a lot of terrifying fascistic misinformation. It's very scary what he's talking about. But one of the conversations that people have talked about, particularly people who are transgender and they're closer to our age, they talk about, this old model versus the new model of being transgender and the medical care, and how is it easier to transition? Is that part of the problem? Is there less? Is the lack of a rigid process today? Is the process rigid today? And if not, is a lack of a rigid process a problem? Do you think? Is there a possibility that young kids are coming in and trying out estrogen at Planned Parenthood because it's the thing to do? And that may be what Walsh is talking about, is just young people experimenting to find themselves. And that's not where we were at, say, with the earlier model where it was stricter. And can you talk about that?
Okay. So there's a lot in both of those. Okay. So I'll try my best to kind of hit the major touch points on this. Okay. And it's a big topic.
Yes.
So number one, just to characterize it, there's an organization that's existed called WPATH, the World Professional Association for Transgender Healthcare Providers. It has existed since the early 80s, okay? And it writes and provides the standards of care that is both sociologically and science-based care for transgender people, sociologically and psychologically. Going back to your original question, and these are generalities, but there used to be an old model specifically for transgender women that, to use the term that was used, it was gatekeeping.
Mm-hmm.
And the definition of it was gatekept by, in general, I'll put that in quotes, in general, by male psychologists telling, male to female people how to be a transgender woman. So there was, how shall I say, baked into that system was a lot of misogyny. And so it was rife with issues. It was rife with problems. And it was rife with even the narrative that somebody should have. Okay. And that narrative that they adopted, well, I've known since I was 3 that I was this, and this is my story, and blah, 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 blah. To get care, you needed a story that said something like that.
Yes.
And so at some point, many of the transgender people started repelling against it, because at some point they would just go into therapy and lie about it just so they could start the process. So it was a very restrictive. It was not a whole system. It wasn't something that embraced the entire spectrum. It was still based on a very binary viewpoint of gender identity. So it had many, 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 many problems. Another facet of it, though, is it required a lot of psychological evaluation, a lot of psychological hoops to go through, and in a pretty challenging process to navigate on the psychological side. If you fast forward to today, the trend, I'll say the trend, it's not all that way. There's a model called informed consent, meaning I'm informed, I understand the risks, I understand the benefits. I could see a psychologist just to start this process, but that might be a very simple, straightforward meeting with a therapist. It might not be a long, involved, process. It might just be a simple thing. Okay, are you healthy? Are you good? Do you understand what you're doing? How long have you had these conditions, circumstances? Okay, so it's easier to start that process. It's easier to start the hormonal process. Okay, or the cross-sex hormones are one of the beginning ways to start transitioning as well, presenting that way, living that way, etc. The surgical options are a little more complicated because in general, getting surgeries and getting approval for surgeries is through insurance companies. And in essence, insurance companies call those shots. So to get surgeries, number one, is dictated by the standards of care of WPATH, but also to get approved, you do need 2 letters from two psychologists or one letter from a psychologist and another healthcare provider like an endocrinologist or a doctor attesting to your medical wellness, attesting to your psychological wellness. Going back to your original question, it is a more relaxed model for certain. It is easier to start the process. Yes. There's good and bad, I think maybe a little bit on both ends of the spectrum, very easy, very...
Well, I want to go on record saying I lived in West Hollywood for 12 years, and I never met anybody who felt like they had made a mistake. Ever. I just, hundreds and hundreds of people I've worked with as a physician. I'm completely open-minded. I am, and I'm not trying to hurt anybody. I believe in data. Show me the data, right? But I'm just saying, in the entire time that I've worked as a healthcare provider in West Hollywood, working with transgender patients, I've never seen anybody say that they regretted it. So
Yes.
What are the odds that people are going to regret it statistically? What kind of statistics are those? I haven't met these people in my entire career.
I will be very honest. I don't have those numbers at hand. What I would say for the set of gender affirming surgeries,
yes,
success rate, the success saying the patient, the client, I'm happy, I'm not happy with this, it's well and above what they are for regular surgeries.
Yeah,
in the
I've heard that.
population. You're talking, it's like in the 90th percentile. For the people that know they need those surgeries, and as well for people who even start the hormonal process, whether they're presenting in public or not as themselves, that gives people transgender people immediate relief from gender dysphoria, which is the psychological term for this. It gives people immediate relief. It gives people something that is essential, and it is needed. And so I am personally in favor of things that support that process. There are many, I've known people who are transgender who their voyage just brought them to the place of taking hormones, and due to their own personal circumstance, their own decisions, that's as far as it went.
Yeah.
Yet that gave them the relief from this condition. And condition's the wrong word. It gave them relief from their suffering, which is really what medicine
because something's wrong. I think it's because
something's
wrong hormonally. I mean, that's what I think. And estrogen can act as a nervine when you have these types of imbalances, and that's why doctors used to view PMS as a type of withdrawal that's worse than a heroin withdrawal for some people, because the hormones drop in your body and you literally go through a crash that, to me, it was worse than being a heroin addict or something. I was like, you've seen me. I mean, we went through it together. I was like, we would be like estrogen, because it is so important to healthy function to have good hormonal balance. I think we're out of time. Oh my God. We are out of time.
I feel like we just got started. I'm ready to roll.
But the good news is you will be back again, I hope, next month. And the topic next month is everything people want to know about what to expect in the process and the surgeries.
Okay,
people wanted to do family first, and they wanted to find out a little bit more about your family. But next interview, we will be answering people's questions about what Tawni was talking about, the various different options for people, and so to help people find the right option for them, support, etc. If you'd like to find out more about Tawni and her services as a counselor, you can find the information below this video. Thank you, Tawni. Thank you, everyone, for watching, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.
And thank you. Thank you,
You're very
Whimsy.
welcome, hon.